Well, hello and welcome back to our Bible study on the book of Isaiah. Today we come
Hi.
to Isaiah chapter 51, part 2. I'm Reverend David Matthews, and I am again with my colleague and friend, Reverend Nancy Springer. Our reading for today picks up where we left off. However, you don't need to have any previous knowledge to be able to, of course, get something out of reading the Bible. So we do encourage you to join with us today and in the future. And of course, there are videos that you can go back and watch as well. So Nancy, would you be willing to start us off today with verse 17 from Isaiah 51?
All right. Yes. And I'm reading from the Common English Bible translation, but follow along with us in whatever translation you have available. Wake yourself, rise up, Jerusalem. Who drank the cup of wrath from the Lord's hand? You drained the goblet of reeling. There's no one to guide her among all the children she bore. There's no one to take her by the hand among all the children she raised. These two things have happened to you. Who will be sorry for you? Destruction and devastation, famine and sword. Who will comfort you? Your children passed out. They lay at the head of every street like antelope in a net, filled with the Lord's wrath, with the rebuke of your God.
Therefore, hear this suffering one, who is drunk, but not from wine. The Lord, your Lord and your God, who contends for his people, says, Look, I have taken the cup of reeling, the goblet of my wrath from your hand. You will no longer drink from it. I will put it in the hand of your tormentors, who said to you, Lie down, so that we can walk on you. Make your back like the ground, like the street for those walking on it. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So, Nancy, in our reading today, we come across this cup of wrath. It seems like God is forever angry. Is that the only attitude that it's being had here? And why does that seem to be happening?
Well, the cup of wrath, right, is God is telling them, right, you are holding it, you are drinking it. I've told you what you need to do so that you will not experience my wrath, and you've chosen not to do it. Um, but that the imagery that it then goes into of a woman and her children, right, that imagery is used so often with God and his people. And we have to remember that along with God's anger is God's heartbreak. God has said to his children over and over and over again what it is, what it means to be his children, what it means to be his chosen people. And we continually choose to do our own way and do our own thing. And God is just, he is both angry and heartbroken and devastated that we cannot um, wake up, right, and see the truth, see what it is that God has in store for us, that if we do what it is God tells us and live in relationship with God, that our life will not be full of God's wrath, but it will be full of wine and good food and all of the things that have been promised, a flourishing life um, that God promises for those who walk with him.
Mhm. Well, why is it that God is angry in this part with Jerusalem in the first place? What has spurred God's wrath to these people?
They've mistreated each other. I mean, that's the big thing, right? Is the leaders of Israel have not taken care of the people of Israel. They have sought their own power and their own might. They have oppressed those who are poor and not dealt justice among the people. So it's, you know, what's got God into this mix of being angry and heartbroken is that his children are hurting each other and causing damage to each other.
So really, it's the playground analogy, if you will, is that the bully on the playground who's picking on the little kids suddenly is now being bullied himself, and God is, if you will, orchestrated that in order to save the one who was originally being bullied. and now will ultimately need to save the one who's being bullied now. And it just sort of seems to be this around and around. The question, of course, is where is the end to this cycle of one person bullying somebody else, who then God in turn saves them by bringing along, if you will, another bully? Where's the end to all that cycle?
Well, the end is us stepping out of that cycle and refusing to be the bully again, but to treat each other with justice and compassion and love, right? From the prophet Micah, we get the well-known phrase of, God's told you, people, humans, what it is you're supposed to do, right? You are to seek justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God. And neither the Israelites nor any of the other nations are doing that.
Yes.
And they are equally accountable for not seeking justice, not loving mercy, and not walking humbly.
And just as we come from, we hear from the prophet Micah in that situation, we also hear from Jesus that, that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that by definition, he is the example of one who steps out of that scenario where he himself is being bullied and crushed and whipped, and as Paul later talks about, bearing our transgressions and being bruised for our iniquities. And
he
in
takes
all of
the
this,
cup of wrath for himself. Yeah,
exactly. Yes, he takes on the punishment, and yet he does not strike back. And it's through that example that we as Christians, absolutely, the famous statement, we love because Christ first loved us. We are able to step out of the cycle because we are able to see that Jesus did it before us. We are able to, if you will, step into that narrative or into that story and embrace that as our own, as Christians, followers of Christ. And so that's an incredible statement there. Yeah, that cup of wrath that you pointed towards, very interesting, because again, at our Seders on Maundy Thursday, which I recognize is not a Jewish Seder, but it's a recreation of what this event may have looked like back when Jesus did it. There is, of course, the different cups, and these cups represent the being freed from Israel, but then there's an extra cup. And that cup is not representative of being freed from Israel. That's a different cup. And that cup is represented or stated here. And that's the cup of wrath. And that's the cup Jesus, of course, says, this is my cup. Right? This is, and as, talks about his disciples, this is the cup that I drink.
Yeah. And when they want to have specific, when Jesus' disciples want to have higher rank than the other disciples, and he says, can you drink the cup that I will drink? And he brings up this imagery because the cup of God's wrath is not an easy cup. And so it is, but it is one that Jesus is willing to take upon himself. And yet, knowing how hard it is, even asks, right, if there's any other way to do it, God, could you take this cup from me? But nevertheless, I will take it if that is what you will. And so, that's our model.
And trusting in God that this is not fruitless, that when God, when the Father states that this is the way, that this is the only way, if you will. That there's not a way Jesus could have been sitting down and being like, well, you know what? I'll just play some board games with my friends and hang out. And that, it'll get us to the same end anyway. We all get up to the top of the mountain regardless, right? And the answer to that is no. That's not it.
Yeah. And that's how the only answer to violence and oppression and injustice in this world is compassion and mercy and grace, right? More violence just brings more violence, more oppression, just because there's always a group that's going to come and try to oppress the one that they're being oppressed, and it just continues in that cycle. And so, the whole point is to get the cup of wrath out of play, so to speak. And that is what Jesus says he will do, that he will drink the final cup of wrath on
Yes.
our behalf.
Yes. Yes. And ultimately, Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit is the only one that can actually bring transformation, so that the individuals themselves don't seek to become bullies, if you will, don't seek to become the oppressors, if they themselves are have accepted this story, accepted this gospel message.
Yeah, yeah. So that we are awake, right? That wake Jerusalem, wake yourself call in the beginning of what we read, right? Is our call to pay attention and to be aware of who God is and who we are, and the message, the good news, right, that Jesus brings. He does bring the good news that we don't, the only way in this world is not violence and oppression. There is a way of love in this world if we are aware that, yeah, what the way Jesus came to teach us in flesh and blood, how it is we are to live,
Mm-hmm.
not seeking power, but seeking to love others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like fundamentally what we're saying is that the only way to stop this cycle of oppression, this cycle of brokenness, of violence, is by all parties coming to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. That sounds like that's the only thing that's actually going to stop this, because any other narrative ultimately has the statement of either we need to save ourselves, or this statement of, we need to stand up for justice and we need to get it back. We need to get him back.
Yeah, right. Right, which is a misunderstanding of what justice is. Justice isn't revenge or retaliation. Justice is justice. I mean, it's everybody bearing consequences of their behavior, but learning to be better. And that's right. I
It's
mean,
ultimately
that isn't
reconciliation.
right.
Justice,
Yeah,
mercy, and reconciliation all come together is one thing. It's because to bring proper justice is to bring mercy to the one oppressed. It is to bring down the haughty and the prideful from their place of position. And it is equally for the purpose of bringing these two parties together so that we all might live in God's house, although having many rooms, one house.
one house. Yeah. And ultimately, right, God is responsible for bringing that about.
Mhm.
Our role here now, as we choose to follow Jesus, is to live as if that has already happened, knowing that there will continue to be violence and oppression in this world until the day of the Lord comes, right? The day that Jesus returns. But we live outside of that. We live spreading compassion and mercy and grace, and choosing not to participate in the violence and oppression of this world.
Absolutely. And in part, we do this breaking the cycle by doing the same thing that the Jewish people were called to do over and over again through the Seder. And it's reminding them that God has saved them, reminding people of the ways in which God has helped you or saved you from being bullied, saved you from being oppressed, and so therefore not to become the oppressor yourself. Right? The line over and over again through the prophets: remember that you were once strangers in Egypt, therefore do not oppress the stranger in your midst. Remember that you were once slaves as Israel, do not therefore take slaves. Like again and again and again, this idea, I shouldn't say don't take slaves, release the slaves, the call was on the 7th year of Jubilee. And again and again and again, to not abuse those without power, because once upon a time you were without power.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is the call. And that's what we as Christians are to remind people of again and again and again. And it's what can break the cycle.
Yeah.
Person of Jesus.
Exactly.
Nancy, is there one other thing that jumped out to me
Mhm.
is you had touched on it earlier, but just wondering if you could reemphasize or go into it a bit more, was the idea of um, that relationship of God to the children, and that
Yeah.
idea of God's brokenness or brokenheartedness at the situation, what's going on.
Yeah, God is both angry and brokenhearted. He is angry at his own children doing the very things, the oppression and injustice, and yet he still loves. Right? He is angry with his children that he loves with all of his godness. Um, and that's a hard place to be, to see one of your children harm another child and you love them equally, you love them the same. And you've got to bring these two children back together in reconciliation, holding accountable the one who caused harm and tending to the one who's been injured. And how do we come back together um, as family? And that's right. That is a mixed up emotional soup of parenthood, um, and that we are not 100% angry and feel nothing else for our children, but that we feel anger and compassion and despair and discouragement on their behalf as well. And so,
Mm,
yeah, I just that picture of God grieving over the misbehavior of his children is just a poignant one for me. Prophet
yeah.
Hosea says it very well too.
And yeah, that goes both ways, of course, for when we are oppressed and when we are the oppressor, is that we
Hmm.
grieve the heart of God. And at the same time, God grieves over us when we are hurt as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right, Nancy, is there anything else that you would want to touch base on before we are done for the day?
Um, I think that's about it. Yeah, I think this was a short little passage, but um, lots of good imagery in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways in which we see the character of God. And as always, we
Hmm.
encourage you to chat about this with friends and family and to see how you feel and think that this would play out in your life and in the world around you. So
Yep.
God bless. And we're glad that you're able to join us today. And we look forward to doing this again next week. Take care.
All right. Bye.